And here we go. Right, so thank you all 5 of you who came back for this final session. I know it has been a long day, and some people had to already take flights out, so there will be diminishing numbers, as we say. But still, I think this is a very, very interesting session because it will be looking on international MSP initiatives, and we have a lineup of really very interesting and important speakers to discuss this. So this session is about, as I said, international MSP initiatives, and what we will be discussing is with the actors who will be presenting the progress, implementation challenges, and potential opportunities related to their initiatives. In this session, we have a rapporteur that I am now inviting on stage, and our rapporteur is Alejandro, Alejandro, where is your name? Now, give me a second. We'll do things properly. So, Alejandro Jover, please come up here with me. Give a hand to Alejandro. He's from IOC. And then the lineup of our speakers is we start with Felix Leinemann from DG Mare. Felix, please join me up here. We have Julien Barbier from IOC UNESCO. Where is Julien? Here it is. Here he is. Julien, please join me up here. We have Peter Hogan from the Institute of Marine Research from Norway. Peter, thank you for joining us. We have Juliana Castaño Isaza from the World Bank. Please. It's Juliana, right? Or Juliana? Juliana. Please take your seat. We have Gunnar Finke from GIZ, Germany. Gunnar. And on the remote connection from a video, actually, we'll have Pan Xinxun from the China Oceanic Development Foundation of China. And what is happening in this session is that we do not have a co-moderator. They are all mine. I do not have a co-moderator for this session because I think the organizers would like to leave me with this final gift. So I do not have any reporting on this issue. We'll go straight into the presentations by the panel members. And after we do this, then we will go into a number of questions that we'll be discussing with them. There is also a question that is addressed to Pan Xinxun, and his answer is recorded also on a video. We have pre-prepared this. And then we will have also the questions that will be shared by you on Slido. So please get on your phones, share the questions you have, and let's make this final session a very, very good one. And without further ado, I would like to first of all invite Felix Leinemann from DG Mare to take the floor. Felix, please join me up here.
Thank you, Spiros, for the introduction, and good afternoon, everyone. I've been asked to talk about the perspectives of the European Commission on the international developments in MSP. And as high as I can. Okay, good, like this. So I would like to start with a slightly bigger context than just looking at MSP, the EU International Ocean Governance Agenda. In June 2022, so June this year, just ahead of the UN Ocean Conference, the European Commission and the European External Action Service adopted a joint communication updating its communication from 2016 on the EU International Ocean Governance Agenda. You can show the first slide, please.
You should change the slides.
I have to show, okay, good. So, fighting climate change and environmental degradation are among the top EU political priorities, and the ocean is embedded in what we call the European Green Deal, the new approach of really making green and blue, in this case, a growth strategy. So at the same time, we see that the decline of the ocean is accelerating as unsustainable human activities and their harmful impact continue to degrade the ocean, which leads to profound changes with the risk of even reaching tipping points. And the ocean state of emergency is a bit echoed in the limited delivery of relevant global commitments. If we look at the Aichi targets under the Convention of Biological Diversity, or the UN 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, where SDG 14 is actually delayed. And this is why the International Ocean Governance Agenda has proposed actions in 4 different pillars: strengthening the international ocean governance framework at global, regional, and bilateral levels, making ocean sustainability a reality by 2030, and making the ocean also a safe and secure space, as competition in international waters and challenges on the rule-based multilateral order are growing. And the 4th part, most importantly, or one of the most important, is of course also building up international ocean knowledge for evidence-based decision-making, and that links very much to the Ocean Decade. Now, this really just to set the context that we are really operating in a broader context also from the side of the EU. But speaking about international action, of course, within Europe, we have also favored and promoted cooperation in and across European sea basins. And that's with a lot of European MSP projects. Since 2015, and you have maybe had the opportunity to look at the booth of the MSP assistance mechanism, the EU MSP platform, we have funded more than 15 transboundary cooperation projects in all European sea basins. They have helped member states work together when they made their national maritime spatial plans, but also to address common challenges in the different sea basins. We are now looking at the 2nd generation of EU MSP projects. Last year, and they are not just about establishing maritime spatial plans, but they are about using the maritime space in a more creative way, involving more stakeholders, looking at more elements. Also, I think we heard from those projects here already, either during the forum or during the conference, the EMSP North and Baltic Sea Region project, or the MSP in Outermost Regions project that was already presented here. And this year, 2022, we are again funding a round of projects that are looking at MSP in a more thematic way. One is MSP Green, looking at the European Green Deal components of maritime spatial plans and how to operationalize the objectives like climate action and biodiversity preservation within MSPs. Regina MSP, where we look at the role of regions. How are regions implementing national maritime spatial plans? How are they, regional or local authorities, going along? And then also REMAP, which is looking more at the data. And also we heard it earlier, we had a technical expert group on data for MSP, which developed this compatible data model that allowed to upload the maritime spatial plans, or that still allows, we are still missing a couple, I'm not looking at any member state in particular here, to upload them in EMODNet, the European Marine Observation and Data Network. Then, and that's not on the slide, we also have a new generation of Horizon Europe research projects. And there you had the 3 sister projects, MSP for Bio, Marine Plan, and MPA's Europe, who have their booth also in the coffee break area. Now, we heard earlier in the Sustainable Blue Economy session, I think, about the main driver for MSP, which has been offshore wind farms, offshore wind development. We heard about the drive to come to 2,000 gigawatt of offshore wind by 2050. In the EU 27 alone, and we have 2 neighbors with the UK and Norway who are also upping up the ante, we are speaking about 300 gigawatts by 2050. This will mean as much as 20 times of renewable energy in EU waters as we have today. It also means that 1/4 of the whole EU electricity production will come from the sea. So what is clear, this will require more space, but at the same time, the use of the sea is not exclusive. We need to preserve nature, restore biodiversity. We need to give other users a role. We have a lot of projects that look at the multi-use, at different opportunities, how to give pilots. And here's an example of the United project that has different pilots showing how to combine, for example, aquaculture with offshore wind farms, floating solar, or even more emerging technologies like wave energy between offshore wind farms. And then besides technical challenges, it's also a question of attitude and of social acceptance. We have a lot of fishermen in Europe who are worried about what this will mean for their professional lives, for their works, for their families. And this is where people come in. So next year, on the opportunity or taking the opportunity of European Maritime Day in Brest at the end of May, we're going to launch the European Blue Forum of Sea Users, which will actually bring together the stakeholders from different industries and have them talk together about a common vision, agree on what we want our European seas to be and to look like by 2030. So this will be an open platform, and we hope that this will really bring also a societal debate forward. Those are just 3 elements I wanted to put here on the table for the discussion. Thank you.
Felix, thank you very much for giving us the perspective of how, does this work? Yes, of how things work at the level of the European Union. And we will have the chance to discuss a few of these points and raise some questions. But before this, we'll go on now with our presentations from the panel members. So I would like to invite Julien Barbier from IOC UNESCO. Julien, please take the floor, who will be talking to us about the initiatives by IOC UNESCO.
Thank you very much. In fact, I'm going to talk about how we can use this joint MSP roadmap that we unveiled yesterday together with the European Commission to really build partnership on marine spatial planning. But before I do so, I think it's important that we look at how MSP is sitting within the international ocean landscape, and particularly in terms of ocean governance. Certainly, you know, MSP has evolved, and I remember almost 20 years ago when Fanny Duver and Buddy Hiller came to IOC UNESCO and came with that idea to try to look at how countries were going in terms of reducing conflicts and using spatial measures in their waters. Since then, it was primarily a concept that only a handful of countries were experimenting with, and now we've gone much farther. I mean, clearly we have I think recognition that the MSP is a necessary area-based policy to shift the paradigm from uncoordinated and sometimes contradictory sectoral policies towards a more integrated, multi-sectoral and participatory overarching process. And in fact, even though at the national, local level, the driver is very much the reduction of conflicts, we have, I think, a number of international drivers that we can really use and leverage. We have, of course, the SDGs, and some of you remember my slide of 5 years ago at the Paris conference. But certainly, a strong signal that came out also of the UN Ocean Conference in Lisbon through the political declaration and really, recognition that MSP is a tool to achieve SDG 14 objectives. We have the climate change process, and coming out of the COP27, we've had for this first time in this year the first Ocean and Climate Dialogue, which also highlighted the importance to integrate climate actions into marine spatial planning and reflect also this into the national determined contributions of countries. We've heard this morning from Joe Appiott about the CBD process and this new target that is emerging of protecting 30% of ocean space by the end of the decade. How are we going to reflect that in MSP? How are we going to use MSP to build that? And of course, that also addresses the issue of the areas beyond national jurisdiction. We still have a very intense negotiating process ongoing now to set up a new legally binding agreement to protect this huge space, which represents 50% of the ocean space. And then again, the use of area-based management is a mechanism which is proposed, but that also requires enforcement, that requires having authoritative institutions that can implement this. So I think these are important elements. We also have a whole sustainable ocean economy agenda, which has been unveiling and developing for the last few years, and of course that was focusing on really looking at how the ocean can deliver food, can deliver energy, can deliver carbon and resilient actions. And of course, the high-level panel on ocean stability, and Peter Hogan will talk about this, provides a very important political driver for moving forward with ocean planning and MSP in particular. And then, we need to look at the funding because, as we say in French, it's the nerf de la guerre, and we are seeing also a lot of global financial mechanisms that are now funding MSP interventions at the national level. And, and of course, we have the European Commission. We have many strong investment there, but we have the World Bank, we have the GEF. So it's not a surprise that, those actions, those areas are also reflected very much into our joint MSP roadmap that we announced yesterday. But of course, we also hope that this responds to the community, to the MSP practitioners community who's represented here in this room. And of course, we do not start from scratch. We've had this partnership since 2017. We have implemented the MSP Global initiative that was completed last year. We've run we had 5 MSP forum organized in the last 4 years, despite the pandemic. And we've learned lessons from the phase of developing specific guidance on MSP, how to increase awareness about MSP and the different stakeholders. In the last 3-4 years, through this initiative, more than 5,000 different stakeholders from over 140 countries were engaged with. So it's a huge amount of work that we are building on, as well as the work on transboundary collaboration that we initiated in the Western Mediterranean region and Southeast Pacific region. So Michel this morning, yesterday actually, I think it was yesterday, yes, reported that about 100 countries and territories are engaged in MSP at various degrees. Yet most of them actually do not have a marine spatial plan, which is actually formally endorsed at the national level. So that means that we need to continue this effort, and again through the roadmap and the partnership and the collaboration to achieve that goal of 1/3 of global maritime areas under MSP. So I would really like you to consider this roadmap as a framework for collaboration. You have, now we've heard and we've debated over the last 3 days about some of those issues that will be addressed, and this is why we structured the forum and then the conference around those. And they are cross-cutting issues, enabling conditions, the science, the knowledge support that we need, the capacity development, the transboundary cooperation, and then more specific thematic areas of work on climate, on protection and blue economy. 15 actions have been identified, focusing on assessing and synthesizing research and best practices, but also generating co-designed guidance and developing capacity development and dissemination through various mechanisms. I just want to highlight the aspects related to science because it's close to the heart of my organization. But certainly, I think using the UN Decade for Ocean Science, there's a very strong potential for developing new MSP tools that really address and look at the assessments for planning, but also looking at the way we generate and access data, the way we use ocean observation, the way we use ocean predictions to support the implementation of MSP. On the climate change aspects, I mean, again, we had such an interesting session this morning. We need new ways and new guidance on how to really translate that into a very concrete way at the national level through MSP process. We know that with the changes that are occurring in 30 years, it's quite likely that a lot of MPAs that we are setting up now are going to be in the wrong place because of the impact of species migration. So we need to find this. We need to find a way and a dynamic way to approach this. So I'm also pleased to announce that in 2023, thanks to this great collaboration we have with Felix and DG Mare, we will be bringing back MSP Global online. This will be at least for an initial 2 year. We will also have a new MSP forum, probably towards the end of next year. And we will also go into the regional level. We have identified, through also the support of our Swedish friends, ways to try to catalyze these actions at the regional level so the countries can really also address their own priorities and create collaborations there. We'll continue, of course, to track the implementation, and I think, what was presented on the first day. Yeah. No. Oh, slow down. Okay. Yeah, sorry. Yes. Too much coffee, of course, at the coffee break. That always works on me. Sorry about that. So we'll continue to track the progress. But I think the key message that I want to give you, and I've checked with with Felix first, is that this roadmap is not an exclusive relationship between IOC and MSP. And we very much would like to invite our institutional partners to join forces and work with us in the delivering of those key actions and in this MSP roadmap, so that we can really grow this into a global coalition that can really deliver in all ocean basins and enhance also the advocacy of MSP globally, because we need also this to be heard at the international level. So that's coming a bit late.
We need to wrap up. So.
Yes, my last slide, which is really at the end to focus on capacity development, because I think this is what we are talking about. And, you know, we cannot just focus our efforts solely on building MSP expertise. We need to have a whole of society approach. I think we need to work with different tools. We need to support governments. We need to support practitioner organizations. But we need to support citizens and society as a whole to complete their own locally contextualized transitions toward MSP approach on the ground and, of course, in the water. So for that, we have many tools. You know, we have a global community of practice. We have education and training. But here, I think we need to really make efforts to invest in education that really are going to generate, you know, the new generation of ocean planners. And that also requires putting emphasis on the skills, not just the specific expertise, but the skills of managing processes. And the social sciences we've heard yesterday are such an important element in terms of facilitation, communication, negotiation, and so on. We need to come up with innovative approach, and you know, we're also very happy to team up with Government of Netherlands with the MSP Challenge game as a good way to also really create that awareness, and we have now more than 12 institutions around the world that are working on this. And finally, we need to invest in ocean literacy, because without that, we are not going to be able to raise the public and stakeholders' awareness about the MSP process and its benefits. So I think this is a kind of, to wrap up, our vision. I hope it's our vision for the next 5 years, and again, to open up this to all your contributions to this process. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Julien. You do realize that I have been very understanding with the time limits for both Felix and Julien, not only because they are the co-organizers of this event, but truly because the two institutions drive the process of MSP in Europe and globally. And I think it is beneficial for all of us to understand the thinking and the process and everything behind. But they're not the only ones. So let's now hear from Peter Hogan from the Institute of Marine Research. Peter, would you like to take the floor, please? Who will be talking about the high-level panel for a sustainable ocean economy. 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. Thank you much to the organizers for having me here, and it's been a splendid 2 days up to now. And I would also like to thank, in particular, the EU for being, and DG Mare for being, spearheading these kind of initiatives. I mean, it's clear leadership that is relevant to the world and which is really bringing us forward. So it's a great pleasure to be here. My talk will perhaps pick up one of the issues that I heard over many talks over the last 2 days about the political will, a political engagement to affect the kind of things that you try to affect with MSP. So, green one. So I will talk about what I call the Ocean Panel for short, or the High-Level Panel for Sustainable Ocean Economy. That was created in 2018 by invitation from the Norwegian Prime Minister. And then there were 14 countries coming together, and about 2 years ago produced a political document which is called Transformations for a Sustainable Ocean Economy. And now we've had 2 more years. We've had more members coming in. We had the US, France, and recently UK, so now there are 17. You can see from the map. I don't read all of them. And the idea here is that the prime ministers and presidents of these countries, they are responsible for what's happening in areas under their national jurisdiction. So the panel agenda very much focuses on what they can actually do something about, where they have the political mandate. That doesn't mean that it's only interested in those areas or that these countries are so very special compared to others. But it's a forum of leaders from countries from all parts of the world who can sit together and see if they can agree on a forward-leaning agenda for the ocean, essentially. And building on the premise or the joint understanding that we can make, effective protection, sustainable production, and equitable prosperity go together. In fact, they depend on each other. And we look for ocean-based climate solutions. We come up in 2019 with a very, at that time, optimistic foresight for offshore wind. It's just taking off now. We see that. And we talk now about offshore wind as a driver for MSP, but again, IOC and the EU and others have been around with this for a long time before, so that when it comes, we are ready to take up the challenge. So this political agenda has 5 pillars. It's maybe some of them are more familiar and talked about than others. Ocean health, ocean wealth, ocean knowledge, but then we also have ocean finance and ocean equity. And in all of these areas, these countries are committed to try and achieve this ocean we want. So particularly these countries, the 14, are committed to, by 2025, they say sustainably manage 100% of the areas under national jurisdiction. Sustainably manage 100% of the area under national jurisdiction, 2025 or 5 years for those who are joined later. And what does that mean? Well, 1 year ago, we produced what we call a guide to 100% sustainable ocean management. It's available on the web. Contrary to the transformations, which is a purely political document, and 20 or so, expert reports which have been published, and most of them also with short versions in the Nature periodical. This document is kind of an intermediate. It's interpreting what the leaders have said, and it's been developed in a joint process between experts and organizations and representatives of the leaders. So in short, the 9 key things that needs to be included in a sustainable ocean plan. 3 on process. It has to be inclusive, integrative. Inclusive meaning everybody getting to the table, integrative across sectors, and iterative like most marine spatial plans. Place-based, there we go. Ecosystem-based, knowledge-based. I don't spend time on that. I think we've heard a lot about that. But then comes endorsed, financed, and capacitated. And that's where the political will is really important. We have these countries saying that, we want something that to be endorsed at the highest level. And then it means it also has to be financed and it has to be capacitated, and some of the work we've heard about here is definitely quite relevant to get that capacity going. There are also what we call in this report useful components. You will see that area-based plans are in there. We don't really require all of them to do a specific sort of schematic for marine spatial plan, but we think it's useful. Ocean accounts are also in there. Really important to have natural capital valued and the ecosystem services. But then there are all of these social and cultural consideration. Maybe there are economic development strategies plans which are also part of this sustainable ocean plan. And of course environmental protection. And we always keep in mind enabling finance and enabling policies. So this is where these countries are going. They encourage all others to go out and do the same, so that by 2030, they say all areas under national jurisdiction. Of course, that doesn't mean we're not interested in areas beyond national jurisdiction, but that has to be taken up in other fora than among these nations talking to each other and going home and do what they say when they agree on it in these fora. So with that, thank you very much. Documentation can be found on oceanpanel.org, and I'm happy to discuss how we can develop this area further. I think support to the Marine Spatial Planning Initiative is a natural thing for this panel, and also I think that will contribute to realizing the ambitions of the panel members. Thank you very much.
Peter, thank you so much for a very clear and comprehensive and very helpful presentation indeed. And I would like now to move to our next speaker, who is Juliana Castaño Isaza from the World Bank. I think you will be speaking to us about ProBlue, right?
Well,
and other things.
Yes. Hello. everyone. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's a pleasure to be the only woman in the panel. So thank you to the organizers for inviting me. I'm Juliana Castaño, Natural Resources Management Specialist at the World Bank. I work under ProBlue as well. ProBlue is a multi-donor trust fund that is comprised of almost 14 donors, around $200 million. A lot of those donors are here. Why am I bringing ProBlue to this conversation? Because I believe it has been transformative. In 2022, for every $1 that ProBlue invested in technical capacity, we catalyzed $268 in lending operations linked to the marine environment. In fiscal year 22, it means like last year, the ocean-related active portfolio at the World Bank was $7 billion. So we have been talking a lot about financing and why is it that these numbers matter? Well, because we believe that the World Bank has a strong role to play in the development of the blue economy, and marine spatial planning is at its core. So here, I wanted to show you a toolkit. A lot of us have been talking about toolkits. We produced this marine spatial planning for a resilient, inclusive blue economy toolkit, which is comprised by a series of guidance notes and fact sheets that are related to the marine spatial planning phases and the data and tools that are needed for the marine spatial plan. So these guidance notes take advantage of the World Bank strength in financing, technical capacity, and also the convening power across multiple sectors and mobilizing financing also from the private sector. So the World Bank and clients can design, implement, and monitor marine spatial plans. So there are 2 volumes of the main guidance note, but we also developed the economic guidance note that guides the client countries on using various tools and data for a robust economic analysis that we have been talking about, including the ocean accounts, so we can increase the buy-in and foster livelihoods and allocate the right space and resources in the marine space. We also have these fact sheets about gender and social inclusion, climate smart marine spatial planning, and also biodiversity and ecosystem services. I want to highlight here another tool that we have that is about blue public expenditure review. This has been a great tool that we developed to accompany the marine spatial planning process. This guidance note helps the teams and the governments to answer key questions like how much that the government is spending and on what. How much is spent now? So what is the adequacy of these budgets, and what can be afforded in the medium and long term? And are these public resources being used efficiently and effectively? So these are very important questions when we develop the marine spatial plannings. So the application of these tools help the teams and the governments identify these budgetary gaps and then develop new financing streams that can be blended financing. It can be only public or private sector financing. So here, with this in mind, I wanted to show that the World Bank is catalyzing marine spatial planning efforts. With the application of these different tools, we are building the blocks at the country and regional levels to develop marine spatial planning. And ProBlue has seen an increase of the demand of marine spatial planning going from 3 countries in 2020 to 26 countries in 2022. These are all in technical assistance and lending operations. And they were actually presented by some of our colleagues here, including in Mozambique, the Eastern Caribbean, Kenya, Indonesia, and we have many more. And then on the right, we have this new program that was launched last week at the COP27. You can feel free to research online. And you see that MSP is one of the priority areas for the Africa region. And here, I wanted to let you know that we have talked a lot about offshore wind, but I wanted to mention that the World Bank Environment Team, that is the one that I belong to, we don't work alone. That's one of the, I think that the beauty of working at the World Bank, I have to say, that we can work with other sectors. So we are internally coordinating with other sectors and then mobilizing finance for these investments. So we're working with the urban development teams to reduce marine pollution from the source or downstream, and also with the IFC on the development of blue markets, including blue bonds. So this is just an example of how we worked with the energy team, that Michelle supported the development of the environmental and social framework for offshore wind spatial planning. And this is ensuring that the offshore wind sites avoid sites, areas that are with high environmental sensitivity or social sensitivity. So with these slides, I leave you with the QR code so you can download the MSP material. I can also hand out some of the cards with this QR code, and you can also Google ProBlue to search for more resources. And thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, Juliana. Thank you so much. Let's leave that slide on for just a second so people can take a picture of that if they want to download the QR code. If we can go one slide back. So in case you need to download this material, please take the picture now. While I am inviting on the podium Gunnar Finke from GIZ, Gunnar will be speaking to us about how Germany supports international cooperation on MSP and other things.
Thanks very much, and thanks to the organizers for inviting GIZ to present today. Under the G7 presidency of Germany, an ambitious ocean deal was agreed, which reaffirms the G7's commitments and boosts its actions on ocean conservation and sustainable use. Germany supports a strong new framework for action under the CBD and has joined the High Ambition Coalition for Nature and People in support of the global 30 by 30 target. For the first time also, a special envoy for the oceans has been appointed by the German government. And I think this is a strong signal that national and international sustainable ocean development is a priority for the German government. And importantly, the German Chancellor announced on the sidelines of the latest UN General Assembly that Germany is increasing its international biodiversity funding to 1.5 billion euros per year, which represents an increase of around 0.9 billion euros from the German government's average funding between 2016 to 2020. So it is a significant commitment, which represents also one of the highest commitments of all industrialized countries to biodiversity conservation so far, sending an important signal also to the upcoming CBD conference of the parties in Montreal. And it is really in this political context that GIZ, the organization that I'm representing here today, is situated. GIZ is the federal organization of Germany for international cooperation. As such, we implement international cooperation projects between the German government and its partner countries or regions around the world. We work primarily on behalf of German ministries and primarily on behalf of the German Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development. But also we are commissioned through others such as the German Environment Ministry and also other partners such as the EU. Given this key role that oceans play in Germany's international engagements and commitments, we at GIZ implement also a number of projects on MSP. And I'd just like to name a few here. We provide direct policy advice to the German Development Cooperation Ministry in positioning MSP within Germany's development cooperation. This means that we support the ministry in developing its portfolio of bilateral or multilateral investments, which includes its engagements with the World Bank, for example, or other development banks in terms of Pro-Blue, but also as part of Germany's commitments under the GEF, to which it is the second or the largest donor, actually. As a direct contribution to the UN Ocean Decade, the German Development Cooperation Ministry, but managed through GIZ, supports the development of ocean science partnerships between German and African research organizations. And a number of these decade actions are actually focused on building MSP knowledge. We also work with regions and selected countries, such as those in the Benguela Current, in the Western Indian Ocean, in the Caribbean, or in the Asia-Pacific region, in practical implementation and introduction of MSP and in establishing the needed governance structures. So from these diverse engagements in MSP, I would like to highlight just two challenges and needs for international cooperation in support of MSP. One, I think introducing MSP takes time. It demands shifts in minds of peoples, changes in structures and how powers are shared and decisions are taken. I think you're all very much aware of that. But in terms of international cooperation on MSP, I think it necessitates that international cooperation also plans in longer terms and time frames. We need to think beyond 3-year project cycles, and we need to think sustainability in terms of international cooperation on MSP from the outset when designing projects and corporations. This is probably also not new, but we must get better at it. At least that's the signals we're getting from our national and regional partners. And secondly, I think there's many international players and donors that are active or becoming more active in MSP, and I think this is great. However, in turn, this also means that partnerships, coalitions, and alignment between these diverse partners and the investments that they are willing to put in on MSP is becoming more critical. And of course, this is a mutual responsibility of both donors and partner countries and regions. And I do think that it's critical that governments and regional bodies must provide strong guidance to development partners in future to make sure that there are no duplications and synergies are improved. So really, to conclude, new opportunities for international cooperation on MSP are emerging given the international policy context and with more financing coming in, as I highlighted. This requires that MSP is positioned as a process that can contribute to addressing both the climate and the biodiversity crisis, and we have heard good examples in this conference. And I think it's critical because these are the two major funding vehicles to drive MSP worldwide. We at GIZ look forward to playing our part in this and engaging further with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter. Gunnar, sorry. I think that it was very interesting to hear the two main points that you mentioned in the end. This actually concludes the present speakers, but we also have a video by Pan Xin-Shun from the China Oceanic Development Foundation, which we'll watch. It's his contribution to today's session. So, Oscar, can we please play the video?
女士们、先生们、朋友们，大家好！很荣幸参加第3届海洋空间规划国际会议。海洋空间规划是海洋治理的重要工具，对有效保护海洋生态环境、合理开发海洋资源、稳健发展海洋经济、促进海洋可持续发展有着十分重要的作用。中国十分重视规划工作，并把它作为 经济社会发展的指南。中国从上世纪70年代提出海洋空间规划，并开始研究、探索与实践，到现在已经历中国海洋空间规划第1轮、第2轮、第3轮，正在进入第4轮中。第3轮海洋空间规划把中国管辖海域划分为海洋保护区等8类1级功能区1931个，22类2级功能区4万多个，将全国30%近岸海域和37%的大陆岸线纳入红线管控范围，设立海洋自然保护地145个和国家级海洋牧场示范区136个，设立了各类型的开放利用区。近5年整治修复岸线1200多公里。中国海洋空间规划在时空上较好地处理了保护与开发的平衡关系，在实际效果上实现了保护与开发和经济发展相统一目标。中国的这些实践与经验受到海上丝绸之路国家的关注与重视，希望与中国开展合作。为此，中国海洋发展基金会设立了推行海洋空间规划、助力蓝色经济发展海上丝路项目，与孟加拉国、柬埔寨、斐济等18个国家签署了合作文件，并围绕海洋空间规划、海洋生态保护、海洋产业布局、海洋人才培训、海洋综合管理制度及信息系统建设等展开了积极合作，取得了阶段性成果。主要成果为：一是海洋基金会、海洋空间规划研究院分别与18个国家的海洋行政部门和海洋科研院所组成了海上丝路项目合作联合团队；二是海洋基金会与签约国家合作举办了各种形式人才培训30多次，培训管理和科技人才2000多名；三是开展海岸实地勘察及与当地百姓座谈交流100多次，涉及人数5000多名；四是收集整理资料并汇编成册100多册；五是开展专题研究，并形成海洋生态保护地选划、海洋生物多样性保护、海岸沙滩保护与旅游、海岸线保护与整治修复、海洋渔业捕捞、海水增养殖、港口建设与航道和锚地、海洋产业布局、海岸城镇建设与污水排放处理等专题报告100多个；六是完成10多个国家的区域海洋空间规划初稿；七是资助接收10多名科技人员到中国做访问学者；八是组织中外100多家企业参与海上丝路项目合作的18个国家的投资兴业研究；九是推行海洋空间规划，助力蓝色经济发展海上丝路项目于2021年被联合国批准为联合国海洋10年行动。接下来，我们与18个国家的海上丝路项目合作团队，一道克服困难，加紧工作，早日让海上丝路项目的成果造福海上丝路国家的人民。最后，祝第3届海洋空间规划国际会议圆满成功。谢谢大家。
I think it was very interesting to see this perspective from China and the work that is being done internationally and regionally. And now we have the time for the questions that had been already shared with the speakers, and then we will look also into the questions that we have been receiving through Slido. But let me start with the questions that had been shared. And first of all, I would like to turn to Julien. In summing up what we have heard, what do you think are the types and kinds of international cooperations that are needed to drive MSP and to foster forward movement with MSP and to foster the partnerships among international players that are needed to support national MSP processes?
Thanks very much for that question. So I think we need to start sweeping in front of our door, and given that for example, IUC is part of the UN system, I think it's important that we really start pushing that that discussion and this dialogue across the different agencies of the UN. Just for your information, we have about 26 UN agencies that have a piece of the ocean under their mandate, whether it's the fisheries, whether it's the seabed, whether it's the shipping, whether it's the environmental policies, and so on. So, unfortunately, this only reflects the national, way we are treating the ocean in our countries. So I think certainly creating bridges across different agencies is important. From our side, we started to work with FAO, for example, in engaging blue ports and in fishery ports into MSP, because they are also very important stakeholders. We mentioned, Ole Vestergaard mentioned this morning the decade of ecosystem restoration, which is another example. But I think there is also a mechanism we haven't mentioned. Well, Peter kind of highlighted it, and that's the coalition of agencies that are working on promoting this concept of sustainable ocean planning. The idea there is to really raise the political ambition, but also create a more coordinated platform for the ones who have the technical expertise, the ones who have the financial means, to come up with a more integrated package of support when it comes to helping countries with MSP implementation. It's a nice concept. We need to really translate that into an operational mode, and so we'll certainly look forward to work with our partners in doing that in the coming months.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I will go back to the same question to Gunnar, because I mean, from what we heard from you, there's a lot of cooperation coming up also from the side of Germany, but in practice, how do we foster this collaboration?
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I think what type or kind of international cooperation is needed is one that is cooperative, as has been pointed out, of course. But I really also think that we have to link technical and financial cooperation better. Often the technical cooperation can pave the way in terms of developing initial capacities at national level, and therefore pave the way for financial cooperation through the development banks, be it internationally or nationally, such as Germany's KfW, to ensure that financial cooperation then also can scale what has worked and to sustainably finance it. And in terms of partnerships in development cooperation, I think a new model that has emerged at European level is that several European countries unite behind one common goal, such as in the context of the Team Europe initiatives, which I think are a great example how partnerships can be fostered and how more funding can be leveraged and aligned. So MSP in this type of arrangements would be an interesting avenue to explore further. And really, I think international cooperation needs to be one in terms of MSP that provides integrated solutions, and to me that would mean that it does not just support the development of a marine plan, but that it supports a planning process where, for example, new MPAs are one of the outputs, or one that integrates ecosystem-based adaptation opportunities in terms of climate change adaptation.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Gunnar. The same question was addressed also to Pan Sin-Chun, and we have the video of what he answered. So, Oscar, if you could play the second video from Mr. Sin-Chun.
需要雷整国际合作来推动海洋空间规划。
We need to go back. I cannot translate, I'm sorry. 需要雷整国际合作来推动海洋空间规划向前发展，以及如何在有兴趣支持国家海洋空间规划进程的国际参与者之间建立伙伴关系。海洋空间规划是推动海洋可持续发展的重要制度与工具，建议由联合国教科文组织政府间海洋学委员会总牵头，联络区域国际海洋组织如欧盟委员会海洋事务和渔业局、
西太、峰会等，组织相关国家感兴趣的海洋组织参加，如中国海洋发展基金会等，并建立海洋空间规划国际伙伴关系，来推动海洋空间规划在全球的施行。伙伴关系可每年召开1-2次会议，交流海洋空间规划经验，研究部署推动海洋空间规划实施的统一行动。
Great. So let's move on. I have a second question that I will expect Felix and Juliana and Peter to take turns in responding to. And this question is, what levels and branches of government should be involved in MSP? And how do you think they should be involved in order to make the process more effective? So which are the parts of government, how they need to be involved to make things more effective? And I will start by Felix.
Yeah, thank you. In the European Union, we have the subsidiarity principle, so that the authority that is closest to the action that needs to be taken should take action. And according to the EU Treaty, we have the EU member states who are working on maritime spatial planning, but I think they are not the only ones who are involved. There's different levels of responsibility. In some member states, we have regional authorities who are in charge of coastal waters, for example, who are in charge of land planning according to the national rules. So this is why this new project, Regina, that I mentioned, will be important to see also, because from the EU level, we have not been working with the regions directly on maritime spatial planning. There is a role for the European Union because we have helped member states, we have supported them in cooperating across borders and cooperating in different sea basins. We have brought them together to share experiences, best practice, and with the MSP platform, we have tried to give them tools to work together. So I think there's room for many different authorities at the relevant level, because in the end, also a port, for example, will have to play its role in maritime spatial planning, as we see here in Barcelona.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Felix. Juliana, from your experience working around the world in many different countries.
So, first of all, I guess one of the main things we need to do is to elevate this dialogue to the Ministry of Finance, which is something that is very difficult, and most of the marine spatial planning efforts are laid out in a basis of conservation. So our counterpart is usually the Ministry of Environment, which usually, unfortunately, doesn't have enough power. So how can we elevate that? So we need to gauge the interest within the government structure, and there are other tools that can be applied that are the public sector functional review, that can help identify the best entity for that. So we need to identify this agency that will be in charge of the overall coordination, the management, implementation, and monitoring of MSP. Some countries already have one, but then there are others, especially in the developing world, that need to have one specific to be selected. Then on a separate but related point, again, is the economic analysis. I think that understanding the economic trade-offs is key. Who are the winners and the losers? So you can provide these insights to the policymakers and to engage them in the development of MSPs. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. And Peter, what is your take on this?
Thank you. I think I alluded to in my talk the necessity to go sort of to the head of government, head of state in the national areas. But that's not the only thing. I mean, it's necessary to have, in terms of the national areas, the top level to designate, who is responsible for running a process. And in that process there, you need to talk to all the different ministries and have some kind of, top level decision on that. But then in order for this to work, there needs to be trust and contact on a lower level, even on the technical level, because otherwise it's not going to work. And that's why I think it's so important to have, both on the national levels, but also internationally, communities of practice, creating this momentum and this, in the end, political support to keep this process going. So there is a feedback loops here that have to work together. And then the really tricky question is, of course, the areas beyond national jurisdiction. There was a question earlier today about that and how to deal with that. I think If countries do their get their act together and do it nationally, then we can sort of move into the international areas. And then I haven't even talked about the complexities. I mean, federated states and local government. In Norway, we have had good experience with the deeper water, far from the coast. We have integrated management plans, worked with that for 20 years. Coastal areas is more difficult, regional authorities. So it's not a simple game, and you need authority, and then you need engagement and transparency and trust among the players, I think.
Thank you so much, Peter. I'm keeping the point you said about, not only staying at the high political level, but also involving the people that will be doing the technical work and the reiteration process, which I think is very important. We then have a question about the capacity development, and the question is, how can we make sure that capacity development activities on MSP can achieve the best results? And that's a question again for Julien or Juliana or whoever else wants to come up on this thing, because I believe that capacity development is tremendously important.
Thanks. Absolutely. I think I alluded to that in my presentation, but certainly I think the issue of cell-driven capacity development is also very important. I mean, we talked about a lot of international tools, guidance, guidelines, and so on. And those are really there to inspire communities, but they really need to be a way to translate those to the local conditions, to the local language. That sounds obvious, but it's not always. And the socioeconomic and the administrative way of the way society work. I think we need to invest more in interdisciplinarity, and I think their call heard yesterday on having more social science and governance science or somehow engaged. We need to focus on the skills. I think we still may be chasing the ideal MSP planner, thinking that this is somebody who has all this expertise in one person. But maybe we should think about an MSP planner as someone who can really bring together those different fields of expertise in one team, and help setting up a vision across those different fields. Early career professionals, I think that's also a priority. It certainly is a priority for the Ocean Decade, and we need to look at different mechanisms to create collaborations, mentoring schemes, and get these young people to really be more present in our conferences, but also come up with their own ideas on how to implement and disseminate MSP approach. I think one thing we haven't talked too much about is the vulnerable and poor populations in some countries who have actually no access to the MSP process. They are probably the first one being impacted, but at the same time, they don't know how to enter, or they don't know how to access the powers to be able to also be heard in a voice. And I just wanted to highlight some of the work we've been publishing together with the government of Sweden in Africa on how we really try to integrate this vulnerability population and poor livelihoods into the MSP framework. And for that, we need capacities as well.
Thank you so much, Julian. And I see, Juliana, you're ready to respond to this, please. Yes.
Okay, well, thank you. I think that the Blue Public Expenditure Review that I was talking about, that tool, I think it's critical because it will help us identify the budgetary allocation at the institutional level. And you know that staffing depends on that. So if there's not enough budget, then there's not enough staff to do so. So if there's no enough budget, I guess that some ways that we can address this, and I think this goes back to Sergio's presentation, the taking the leap of faith, I guess, especially in those circumstances when there's data scarcity and uncertain situations. So we need to strengthen the partnerships. And then there are two examples that I wanted to bring. One is the development of the right TORs. I think that's critical because then whenever we as international institutions, we hire firms, we need to make sure that this knowledge and the capacity is transferred to the local people, not that the international firms, they just go, implement this work, and then they leave, leaving a report on top of the table. Then the other thing is working with the local firms. while sometimes the procurement processes are difficult, I think that we can make an effort to hire the local firms, to work with the local universities, for example, so they can bring this knowledge into the curricula, and they can also help with the monitoring work that needs to be in place for the MSP to be successful.
Thank you very much. I very much appreciate your last point, because yesterday we heard from Dan from New Zealand also about the importance of incorporating local knowledge, tradition, and so on. So, you know, maximizing the benefits from involving the local knowledge and capacity is very important. And of course, just come back to what also Julien was saying, you need to empower, you need to involve, you need to engage and open the dialogue. It's very important, because the MSP Superman does not exist, so it's not a one-man thing. We have quite a lot of questions on Slido too, but there is one final question that I would like to take from the set of discussion of questions you had discussed already, and we do have a third video by Pan Sin-Sun also, and this is, I find it very interesting, because the question is, what are the key aspects that can accelerate the value chain from science and tools towards well-informed MSP process? Because connecting science with MSP is very important. I would suggest that we play the video first, if you would like, and then we take anyone who wants to respond also to the connection of science and MSP planning.
推动海洋空间规划从科学研究到广泛应用这条价值链的关键因素是什么？推动这条价值链的关键是政府和企业。政府制定海洋空间规划需从海洋调查、资料收集、科学分析、规划编制、颁发实施、行政监督、规划评估以及规划调整等，形成一个地方过程。这个过程及价值链条主要由政府主导。企业在海洋空间规划的引导下实施开发利用海洋资源的项目，要完成项目可行性研究到项目方案设计、项目建设、项目运营、项目维护、产品营销等全过程。这个过程及价值链条主要由企业主导。
And do we want to have another comment on the connection and the connection between science and application, or we go straight to Slido, whichever? Yes, Peter.
If I may, I think supplementing that, I think this is probably not the one answer that applies everywhere, and what is working best, and the communities are different. But I think being able to communicate well between the policy level and the knowledge producers, if you wish, is the key thing here. Communication, communication, communication. Being able to formulate the needs in a good way from the policy level, and being able to respond from the knowledge producers. That sounds simple, but it doesn't always happen.
Yeah, thank you very much. Julien and then Felix.
Yeah, thank you. Also to highlight that, you know, science and knowledge are something that needs to be there throughout the process, not just at the start of a MSP process, but you need science in observations to monitor the implementation, to do the evaluation of the plan and develop the adaptation. So I think we need to start with a good map, and we still don't have a good map of the ocean. We only have 25% of the ocean seafloor, which is, you know, mapped in high resolution, and many countries, developing nations specifically, do not have this high resolution map. We need to build the ecosystem science and, you know, integrate all aspects related to marine food webs, but also how, you know, we cope and we identify multiple ocean stresses that we're talking about, the ocean acidification, the oxygenation, the warming. So for that we need the right observations. We need also to have the right platform for generating the data, integrating the data, and accessing the data, and to develop those information products. We also need to invest more into a knowledge system, traditional knowledge systems, you know, and not just compete, but really try to create synergies between this. Peter mentioned the science policy interface, which is very important. And I just want to highlight that in the framework of the Ocean Decade, we would really like to try to develop a science-based framework for supporting sustainable ocean planning and MSP. So this is something that we will work on in the coming months with all our partners, because there's not one agency that has all the expertise. It's really to try to come up with a global resource that will really help the implementation of MSP and provide technical resources to countries around the world.
Thank you, Julien. Thank you. And Felix, you wanted to add something on this?
Yes, very briefly. One aspect, obviously, is the whole element of marine science and ocean observation and having the data that you need to work, and there's a lot to do. You already mentioned much of it. I was seeing another element when we prepared, as the Commission, the implementation report on the Maritime Spatial Planning Directive earlier this year. We looked at the scientific articles about maritime spatial planning that had been published in Europe over the past years, and we have really seen an explosion of the number of articles which actually came out. And that's hopefully also thanks to many of the projects that we had in Europe developing cross-border cooperation. But in all these projects, you had scientific institutes, you had universities that were involved, you had academics that were involved, and where we have really gathered quite a very broad knowledge base, and not just in Europe, but also beyond, certainly.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Okay, so I think we can now move to the questions we have from Slido. We have like another 10 minutes. The first one that I see, it's based on something that, Felix, you said in your initial presentation, that it's important to be creative, and the question goes like, it is good to continue to be creative, and this is a very welcome thing, but alongside new initiatives, what about the use of published plans, and how is their impact being evaluated? Which I think it's an automatic answer, but I would like you to comment on, you or anybody else comment on that, about the existing plans and what is the value they bring.
Can I start? Yes. I think earlier in one of the presentations we showed the availability of some of the member states' maritime spatial plans in EMODNet, the European Marine Observation and Data Network, where you can actually not have these excerpts of plans and the rest is white that you sometimes see on the maps, but where you can see the whole sea basin and how these different plans interact, how they take into account neighboring elements. And once you have that on a computer screen, you can zoom in, you can look into the activities, and that's publicly available. That is actually something where any user of the sea can have a look and can realize that they are not alone in using the sea, and they can come together. I think that's the first thing of public awareness, making aware that these plans are there. Then, of course, we have developed tools on monitoring and assessment of the implementation of the plan, which is already the next stage in developing a new plan, because after the plan is before the plan, you are not running in circles, but you're developing new plans as you go.
Super. Thank you very much. Does anyone else want to comment on the? Because I liked very much the visualization you gave to that, that this is not empty space. It's things that we need to build on. All right, so let me go to the next point. One question is that we heard from all of you practically very well set out frameworks and guidance tools and processes and all that. And the question, it's actually, Juliana alluded to that, is whether we are expending too much effort on all these plans and forget to incorporate local delivery and local capacity. I mean, you touched on this. I have an answer, but it's not for me to answer the question.
Well, I actually think that, at least in our client countries, this is a new topic, and we really need to create the knowledge on the ground. And I think that these tools, while they look like, oh, there's a lot of tools, you need to also target the audience. You need to develop the material, again, such as Sergio said, like in a very tangible and very good way to communicate these very complex terminologies and things that we talk about in the marine space, like ocean acidification. When we developed that climate smart fact sheet, it was like, okay, how can we communicate this? So no, I don't think that we're spending too much in the planning. It's natural that we need to have the planning stage and then the implementation, but it also lacks the financing, and that's why we need to build the right environment, legal framework, institutional framework to enable this financing to come down for the implementation.
Thank you, Juliana. Because I don't see anybody else wishing to say something, one point I'd like to raise here is that I've heard from all of your plans about the importance of bringing in stakeholders, bringing in dialogue, and actually to me this is the answer. I mean, if you involve the stakeholders and you have the building of trust and they taken into account of the different perspectives, then this is exactly the service that needs to be provided through the MSP process. Okay, I have a little bit of a provocative question, which I always like. And the question is that there is a relation between MSP and ocean grabbing. Amazing. Ocean grabbing. Mainly in developing countries. What can be done for MSP not to be misled towards this sense? We don't always get the questions we want, so who wants to answer this? Yes, Julian is a hero.
I think we need transparency. That's the only answer. And those processes needs to be opened to the public so that it's very clear. And of course, it's natural that there is going to be some lobbies of specific interests that are going to want to have privileged access to resources. And that's okay. But everybody should start on an equal foot and have the same level of information. So I think going back to this issue of vulnerable people and bringing them into the process is also important. So I think it's a question of transparency, accountability, and that needs to be embedded from the start.
Thank you. Yes, Julia.
Sorry, again me. So I think that we should think about marine spatial planning as a process, that it's not static. So it doesn't end. Like we can't put like, okay, this is how it is, and no, that's what we were talking about, climate change and how can we adapt the whole plan to it. And this is the same for the allocation of space and resources to different sectors. As I don't remember who said about the MPAs, like there won't be there in 10 years. So it might be the same for fishing areas or other things. So we need to develop these plans in a way that are flexible enough to be adapted over time.
Yeah. Peter and then Felix, or
just very quickly, we talk about ocean grabbing, but I think you should expand it a little bit. I mean, examples exist of people coming from the outside, not necessarily grabbing something, but for example, enabling voluntary carbon markets which don't take into account the local population. That's one thing, and it could be other aspects. So it is again a question of having the transparency, as was mentioned, opening up and informing about the basis for what's happening, and making sure that it's not only for those who can finance the activity, for example, for marine protected areas. That's another thing. I mean, marine protected areas can also come in conflict with the local population, and these things really require attention. So even more than the typical ocean grabbing, I would say. Just put it in.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Felix.
Yes, maybe the notion of grabbing has come from the fact that there are some new players who have actually come and who are claiming space, the maritime space, and they are being opposed to those who have always been using that space. Let's take offshore wind, for example, and fishermen who have always been there. The sea is free, and they've been roaming around, and now they feel threatened by the land take or the sea take that is actually taking place. But there's two elements to this. One is, of course, transparency and accountability, that, as Julian has said. Another one is that maritime spatial planning is also a political process. It's a matter of political prerogatives, political decision, and that's why the question, who's doing the planning, the ones who are closest to it. So it's in the EU, it's the member states who decide politically what do we want. As the European Union, we have the European Green Deal, we have a big push towards offshore wind. We see it as an overriding public interest, and that's collectively decided by countries, by prime ministers in, for example, the North Sea or the Baltic Sea, where we have seen prime minister and president's declarations to that purpose. So that's not a grabbing, but that's a political direction, and then the planners, they need to make things happen. The other element is, of course, also the European Green Deal, our biodiversity objectives, having 30% protected by 2030. So it's not just grabbing, it's really putting things together, but it's a matter of perception also.
Exactly. I think the word itself, and that's why I took the question, because I think that there's a lot of hidden meaning between the specific use and intentful use of the word. Gunnar.
Yeah, maybe just to add one more aspect is that, of course, it also requires a strong and sort of legal framework. So putting MSP into acts and legislation will also help in terms of transparency. And in terms of development cooperation, I think it's also good to think of not just support in terms of pure MSP, but also to drive more programmatic approaches that also focus on other aspects, such as strengthening the legislative system of countries, so that it can also support a strong basis for transparent MSP.
Great, thank you very much. I have one last comment, actually. It's not a question, so I will read it out because it connects very much to what you just said, and specifically the fishing part that you mentioned, Felix. Then if you have a comment, you will add it in the end. But it's very interesting to see how this discussion about grabbing new players, all that, sometimes has a very strong sentimental way of appearing. And the comment we got, it's, we don't know, it's an anonymous writer. It says, I'm reading, fishers seem to be the unloved member of the EU Blue Growth family. Amazing. Fish communities' livelihoods seem better considered globally, and MSP must be the house for all at sea. So you see, it's very sentimental, and it's true that, I mean, when you have change and when you have regulation, some will feel like, you know, I'm being left out and everything. But I guess what Julien said, I mean, you have to have transparency and inclusion. It's very important because they all need to feel that they are part of the process, and they also have to be forthcoming with the process, because it doesn't serve anything to just stay back and say, you're not listening to me, you never play with me, you know, this kind of thing. So do you want to make any last comment? Any of you take the floor for the last 30 seconds before we wrap up? Okay, so if you don't, I want your undisturbed attention, all of you, for a very important thing. We have a rapporteur in this session. Our rapporteur is Alejandro. Alejandro is an intern with IOC, and he was requested to do the report for this session. Alejandro was very reserved, very shy, and tried to throw the ball back at me to do the report. And I said, there's no way, Alejandro, you do this. So Alejandro, over the last 4 hours, has been presenting for the 5 minutes that he will present to you. So first, I want you to applaud very strong for Alejandro, who will do this report. Second, I want all of you to help him as much as possible by supporting the points. And what I promised him is that after doing this is the first time that Alejandro will be speaking live on a stage. And what I promised him is that after this, he will want to do it every time. So Alejandro, please join me.